outside of the norm. It wasn't the subject we're going to talk about, but of course everybody's talking about coronavirus, and we thought that it would be worth just giving a bit of guidance. Just to make it clear what we're talking about today, we are not talking about any of the public health issues or what to do to sort of manage that side of the risk within the workplace. So what we've done instead is put up a lot of sources of guidance there, which you can go to for details of that. But the issue, which obviously we are already getting some questions about and are thinking about in sort of various ways, I suppose, is what to do with those staff who are reporting with symptoms of coronavirus. What happens in particular around pay and similar arrangements for them. I was listening to the radio as I was driving in, and something else on the radio from the GMB talking about what to do with healthcare workers and how they should be paid from day one, etc. So there's a lot of lobbying going on, a lot of interest in this particular subject, I think. So we thought it would be worth talking about that. Just before we do, obviously the major issue in terms of looking at sick pay, etc., is self-isolation. So there's just a reminder at the moment as to who the government is recommending should self-isolate. So that's people who are waiting for a COVID-19. That's a particular strain of coronavirus we're all talking about, if they're waiting for a test result. Those who are identified as having been in close contact with someone with coronavirus, or travellers coming back from specific areas. And again, you're going to have to keep up to date with the list of those, but primarily some parts of northern Italy, some parts of South Korea, Iran, a few other areas as well. But the list will be changing. So there's a need to self-isolate in certain cases. And what does self-isolation mean? Well, again, according to the government recommendations, it means staying at home. It means avoiding having visitors. It means keeping your hands clean and disposing of used tissues, etc. Avoiding close contact, even with family members. Making sure your room is well ventilated. Keeping the home clean. There's guidance there as to what to do if you share a house with others, etc. But again, I refer you back to the guidance we put on the first page, should you want more information about that. So what we've done is we've thought of various scenarios, and Vanessa's going to take us through those.
I think especially the past week or so, we've had a number of queries that have come in, all with all different types of scenarios. So we've kind of tried to capture them here, but there may be a few more. And the main question really is in relation to pay. And so that's what we've concentrated on today. So these are the scenarios that we've immediately identified. So the first one is where somebody isn't sick but can't come to work because they're required to self-isolate or be in quarantine. Classic example there is where they've returned from a country that is on the list, where even if you don't have symptoms, you need to self-isolate. Or perhaps if somebody's come into known close contact with somebody who has the coronavirus. A second example there is where somebody isn't sick, but an employer has told them not to come in. So, for example, and this is later on this bullet point side as well, but office closure would fall under that example as well. Or perhaps for other reasons, an employer tells somebody not to come in because somebody's already had coronavirus and they just want to take that group of co-workers and ask them not to come in for the time being and self-isolate.
Or vulnerable workers in the organisation.
Yeah, exactly. So where anybody has any symptoms of the coronavirus, what happens with the pay there? What happens if there's a school closure and a parent needs to take time off work to look after their children? What do we need to do in those situations? And what happens if actually you have employees that are saying to you, no, I don't want to come to work because I'm afraid of catching the virus. I want to just stay in my home until it all goes away. What do we do there? And especially what do we do in relation to pay? And the last example, is where we've already mentioned, is office closures. So the first one, so somebody isn't sick but can't come to work because they're in self-isolation or quarantine following medical advice. Another example here is, of course, if they've just recently been to that hotel in Costa Rica and they're stuck outside in stuck out in, say, Tenerife, and of course they can't travel back to the UK, so they can't come back to work. So what's the situation? Well, actually, as they're actually well in themselves, they're not technically sick, so they're not technically on sick leave, and therefore there's no statutory right to sick pay and no legal obligation on us to pay sick pay. However, when you look at the ACAS guidance, it is recommending that actually they say it would be good practice for an employer to still pay sick pay and follow the usual sick pay policy, or they're given the suggestion of reaching an agreement to take the time as holiday. The view there being that otherwise there's a risk that an employee who really should be self-isolating comes into work anyway because they're afraid of, they're fearful of not getting their pay, which could of course spread the virus. However, I think what I would say to that is, for many, if you're only entitled to SSP, that's still a significant drop in salary in any event. And the other thing is that, of course, saying to an employee, especially when it's on quarantine, can you take it as holiday? Well, that's not really the purpose of holiday, which is meant to be rest and recuperation and relaxation.
So we'd end up with some working time issues
as well.
Because that's been a major theme of the EU cases, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I'm not quite convinced about the holiday suggestion, but it might be that an employee does agree to it nonetheless. So really, I suppose, legally speaking, don't have to pay the sick pay, but actually you may for other reasons, especially in kind of actually wanting to make sure that those employees who should be self-isolating do stay at home and not come into the workplace to spread it, that you do perhaps outside of discretion and pay sick pay. But what else could we do? Well, we could actually say to the employee, no sick pay, but actually you could work from home. You've got all the technology set up. Can you self-isolate and continue to work from home, and you'll manage to receive your usual pay in the meantime? So that's that one. What about where an employee isn't sick but an employer tells them not to come in? So of course, example here is if somebody's returned from an affected area, but the employer, even though the official guidance says they only need to self-isolate if they have symptoms, the employer actually decides, no, we don't want to take any risks. We don't want them to come in. Well, actually, if the employee is ready, willing and able to come to work, and it's us that have said to them, no, we don't want you to come to work, then they're entitled to their usual pay for the period of time that they're required to stay away from the office. And so this would also be a case, and we've had this question recently as well, actually, if your client says to you, actually, I don't want your workers to come and attend my site, and then you're faced with the situation that you don't actually have any work to give your workers. Well, again, they're ready, willing and able to work, so you still have to give them their normal pay. One thing that you could look at, and this will be very sector specific, is perhaps if you've got any layoff pay provisions in your contracts of employment, because you may have something in your contracts where it says that you're able to lay off workers for a period of time, and actually you don't need to pay them. You do need to start thinking about whether they're entitled to guarantee pay, and also there's a redundancy situation that potentially could kick in where they can request redundancy after, I think, 4 weeks continuous layoff. I'm not going to go into any more detail other than that, but obviously if you need further advice in relation to layoff, then let us know. But for some sectors, particularly manufacturing, there are layoff provisions and contracts, so it is worth double checking.
Quite an old-fashioned thing now, but it's amazing you do still see it some of the time, and there will be a specific clause in the contract if you've got layoff or short-time rights, but guaranteed payments, etc. So it's not a get out of jail free card.
And the only thing I was just going to say is, of course, if they are a 0 hours worker, then of course then you, in that situation, you don't have the obligation to provide the work, and therefore you don't need to pay. So I think this one was over to you, Matthew.
Right. So I suppose this would be a scenario where you've got employees with symptoms of coronavirus, and I suppose by symptoms I don't just mean they have a slight fever or a cough, but an actual suspect that there is a suspicion that they have coronavirus, because all the symptoms are consistent with that, and it may also be that they've come back from an affected area, or they have contact with someone who has been diagnosed with coronavirus. As soon as they've got symptoms, then obviously they should not be coming into work. The reason they're not coming into work then is because of a medical condition, and because that's a symptomatic condition, my view is that they are then on sick pay. And I think they have to go on to sick pay whether they're saying, no, I can come in, I haven't got coronavirus, or whether they're saying I may have it, so I'm going to stay at home, or whether or not they're actually incapacitated from work because of the severity or not of their symptoms. I think my view is, as soon as they are in that situation where they're not coming into work because of symptoms they have, then they're on sick leave, and the sick leave regime applies. So that will be sick pay if they're entitled to sick pay, statutory sick pay if they're entitled to statutory sick pay, or if you haven't got any kind of sick pay scheme and they're not entitled to SSP, then no pay at all. So I think then we are into classic sick pay territory, sick leave territory. So that's relatively straightforward, although, as I said this morning on the radio, we're talking about the way in which the GMB is lobbying to ensure that anyone within the health sector, and obviously there are some very poorly paid, poorly treated people such as cleaners, etc., who are just on statutory sick pay. There's certainly a movement there to give full pay from day one, and I suspect that will continue. What about if you've got somebody else who is off work as a result of coronavirus? Vanessa mentioned the example of what to do if a school closes and all of a sudden you've got to find childcare. It may also be, however, that you're actually off caring for someone with coronavirus, may have a child who's got symptoms of it, or a partner or whatever. I think then we are into the rather unsatisfactory regime we have around time off to care for dependents, and what we're talking about there is reasonable time off, and the reasonableness of the amount and the urgency of the time off will depend upon the circumstances. There's been a bit of case law around what the time off allows you to do, although I think there's a bit of inconsistency, because the ACAS guide certainly talks about taking a few days off while someone is off sick, but actually the statutory obligation is to grant time off to arrange care, not necessarily to give care, and that has been looked at in some of the cases. But that rather sounds like I'm turning on the head of a pin in this particular case, perhaps. But certainly it's reasonable. So it's not just a case of saying, right, I'll see you again when the school opens again. It's meant to be time to actually go and put different arrangements into place if you can. It's unpaid on the whole. Now, again, depending upon employers' attitudes, whether or not that time remains paid or not is very much a matter of discretion. But certainly there is no entitlement under the statutory regime to be paid. It may be, although this is a very, very rare situation, that there is some contractual entitlement to be paid during those periods. But on the whole, it won't be paid. So again, what do we say in summary? Well, yes, you've got to give employees time off to make arrangements. That's probably going to be at the longer end of arranging care, of what's reasonable than not if you've got school closed. But you can look and have an honest discussion with your employees about the extent to which they will be paid or not during that period.
So what about employees who refuse to come to work as they're afraid of catching the virus? I think really here we just need to kind of look at the practical steps as to what you would do in this situation. Well, I think the first thing would be you'd kind of ask the employee what their concerns are, and then you're going to be making a view as to whether they're genuine concerns. And we put on there what happens with assertions of health and safety. And of course, we do have to remind ourselves that employers do have obligations in respect of health and safety of their staff. And we have to, and one of those obligations, to keep our employees informed about health risks that may arise in carrying out their duties, and to ensure that working practices don't create undue risks. So, I mean, pausing there and thinking about health and safety, practical steps could be kind of, I don't know, if you have an international business and lots of travel requirements, we've got some clients actually really looking at the travel requirements there and say no only if it's essential, and looking at where the travel is. So that could be obviously a risk area that an employee says they're concerned about, and then you have a discussion with them about it.
I was speaking to a friend yesterday who's in the insurance industry, works for a big insurance company, and they've banned all travel between offices. And the reason they've done that is because they want to ensure that they can always continue to make payments. And the one thing that they see as being a major risk is not being able to make insurance payments out. So they've said, right, okay, well, we're going to keep each office separate, so as to ensure that that at least cross-contamination is no longer an issue.
So there's lots that people are starting to think about, and of course with the technology now, with video conferencing and all that, it makes things that slightly easier. Offering flexible working, of course, is something to consider. And also circulating information about how we can improve hygiene within the workplace, and making sure we've got the facilities to do so. For example, thinking about hand sanitizers and things like that. And also just kind of being clear and transparent with your staff members as to actually what the protocol is if you're returning from a particular area, to contact the workplace beforehand, so to ensure to confirm that you haven't got any symptoms before coming back. And I think if you're transparent about that information to all your staff, the staff will actually feel a little bit more reassured that actually we take, as an employer, you're taking it seriously, you're taking steps. With regards to pay, well, actually, the position is that if an employee says, no, I just don't want to come to work, and there isn't really any legitimate reason for them to do so, then actually they're not entitled to any pay.
That's right.
What accommodations could be reached? Well, we could agree that they could take the time off as holiday, perhaps, or unpaid leave. But again, that really would be at your discretion, the employer's discretion. And then actually, you think that the employer was actually being particularly difficult and didn't really have any genuine concerns, and was just kind of deciding they didn't want to come up to work, then it could ultimately lead to disciplinary action. I'd probably err on the side of caution there. Given that obviously it is a concern, and it's worldwide concern, but still, nevertheless, that is an option to consider.
Yeah, and we've put on there about self-certification. The idea that the employer will just say, well, I wasn't well for whatever reason. Seems to me we could also see some GP certificates, perhaps with anxiety due to coronavirus, etc. So there could be some interesting issues, but we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's our last scenario, office closure, which we've kind of already covered it to a certain extent. And it's currently, the advice is that it's considered to be very unlikely that actually you would need to close an office, although there have been a number of examples already, especially in the city of the law firm as well, actually, on Friday that closed.
Yes.
Closed the office. But again, if the employer's taken the decision to close, then, and if the employees are ready, willing and able to work, then they'll be entitled to pay.
Yeah, I get the feeling in those cases where, because there's been a couple, I think one of the big oil companies closed as well, they're very, very confident that people can work highly effectively from home now, because of their agile working setup. And I think their view is, well, better safe than sorry, and probably it's a good test of the facilities. Yeah,
absolutely. And they, because given where we are with technology now, and certainly if staff are able to work from home, it's a really good option to consider.
Yeah. So, but ultimately, if you take the decision as an organisation to close the office down, then you're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we may find we get into as well is just looking at what employees say they can or can't do from working elsewhere, and looking at how you might change certain employees' duties just so that they're as productive as possible, even if they're not at capacity, if they're not the kind of jobs who would normally be working from home. But I think there'll be some interesting
more feasible for short-time closure as opposed to long-term, because then it will really start getting difficult.
And much more feasible if you're a knowledge worker than someone who needs to make stuff or
absolutely,
or care for people or whatever else it may be. But we'll see. So we thought we'd finally just sort of look at, I suppose, round up with some of the practicalities. And just what we might expect to see. I think there is a danger that employees are going to hide their symptoms if they don't think they're going to get paid, particularly as the symptoms are just so consistent with many other standard winter ailments. So clearly a more generous approach is going to mean that employees are not discouraged from reporting that they might have coronavirus symptoms. The other extreme is if for whatever reason we have employees who are being sent home or who are coming back from an area and don't have symptoms but are being told not to come in, self-isolate. Are they going to make symptoms up so they get into the sick pay regime? Again, I think that's likely. And sorry, this is not us just sort of being highly cynical and skeptical about human nature. It just seems to us the kind of things which are going to happen because pay is so important to employees.
And also it's difficult because if somebody is suspect they've got the virus, the first thing they mustn't do is go to the doctor.
Yes.
So actually certification is actually really going to be really hard in this scenario. So it is quite hard to kind of actually ask for evidence, which will make this become more of an issue.
Which is really what brings us to the third point, which is should we be suspending usual sick pay rules in coronavirus related conditions? I think there's quite a lot of a lot of validity in doing that. Actually making it a case that we will all cooperate. If you're at home, we will pay you, but we expect you to work as much as you can, and that may mean variation to your duties. It may mean that you're working outside of normal hours, etc. But if we're gonna be more flexible around sick pay and absences, then we're going to expect you to be more flexible around what work you do and from where you do it. Which actually I think sort of sticking down some rules and saying what will happen in coronavirus related sickness absence cases is probably the way to go. Which brings us on to that last point about varying duties. And again, I think there's a lot of scope. Would you agree for varying duties if we're expecting someone to work from home or to work away from the office for whatever reason, or if there are certain parts of the job which can't be done, and say, okay, fine, we'll continue to accommodate you, but we need you to take on other duties or to perhaps complete some administration which hasn't been done for many months or weeks or whatever whilst this is going on. And that may mean sort of getting them a bit of an IT set up at home which they haven't otherwise had, looking at getting documents to them, whatever it may be. But I think it's one of these situations where everybody needs to sort of work together for the common good, but actually getting down some rules which support that would be very useful. We haven't developed a standard coronavirus policy yet, have we? No. Maybe that'll be next on the list. But we hope you found that useful. It's not our favourite subject to talk about. It's not the most positive thing. It's worrying for many people, but hopefully just by having a bit of knowledge about it and recognising there's a bit of a need to be flexible, then we'll all get through it.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, thank you.